I never thought the hardest goodbye I'd ever say would be to the front porch where I watched my son grow up. When my son Daniel smiled and told me the nursing home would be safer, I wanted to believe him. He wrapped his arm around my shoulder, kissed my forehead and promised, "Mom, this is only because I love you." 3 days later, I learned he'd already hired painters for my house, and he still had no idea what I'd left behind. My name is Margaret Ellis. I'm 72 years old, and until last year I lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio. My husband, Frank, and I bought that little brick house when we were 28. Every paycheck, every overtime shift, every birthday celebrated in the backyard, it all happened there. Frank worked as a UPS driver for 34 years, and I spent my career as an elementary school librarian. We weren't wealthy, but we owned our home. We never missed a mortgage payment. After Frank passed away from cancer 8 years ago, the silence inside that house became my constant companion. Daniel encouraged me to stay active. He visited every Sunday with his wife, Melissa, and sometimes our granddaughter, Emma. At least he used to. The visits slowly became shorter. The phone calls became less frequent. Every conversation somehow turned into questions about my finances. "Mom, have you thought about selling?" "Mom, the house is probably worth a fortune now." "Mom, maintaining it must be exhausting." I always laughed it off. This house is my home. Then I slipped on my icy front steps one January morning. Nothing broke, but I badly bruised my hip. Daniel appeared that afternoon looking more concerned than I'd seen him in years. "Mom, this proves you shouldn't be living alone." Within weeks he'd arranged tours of assisted living communities. I resisted. He insisted. Melissa kept reminding me how wonderful the activities were. Eventually I gave in. Not because I wanted to leave, because I didn't want to become a burden. The day I packed my bedroom, I found one of Frank's old flannel shirts still hanging in the closet. I sat on the edge of the bed and cried until I couldn't breathe. Daniel hugged me. "I know it's hard." I believed he meant it. The nursing home wasn't terrible. The staff was kind. The residents were friendly. But every evening I looked out the window wishing I were watching the sunset from my own porch instead. 2 weeks after moving in, I called Daniel. He sounded distracted. "I'll visit next weekend." Next weekend became the weekend after. Emma stopped coming altogether. One afternoon another resident asked, "Does your family visit often?" I smiled. "They're busy." The truth hurt too much to say out loud. A month later I needed a few family photographs from my bedroom. I called Daniel. "Oh, actually," he said awkwardly, "we've already started renovating." "Renovating?" My stomach dropped. I had never agreed to that. When I asked why, he replied, "Well, eventually it'll be my house anyway." Eventually. Not yet. That single word changed everything. The next morning I called my attorney, Susan Whitaker. Susan had helped Frank and me prepare our estate plan years earlier. She listened quietly while I explained everything. Then she asked one question. "Margaret, are you still happy with the way your trust is written?" I paused. "No." The following week Susan visited me. Together we reviewed every document. Years earlier Frank and I had created a trust leaving everything equally to Daniel. Back then it made perfect sense. He was our only child. Now, I wasn't so sure. Susan didn't pressure me. She simply said, "Your estate should reflect your values, not someone else's expectations." So I made changes. Not out of revenge. Out of clarity. I left enough money for Daniel to know he hadn't been forgotten. The house, however, would be sold after my passing. Every dollar from the sale would establish the Frank and Margaret Ellis Children's Reading Fund at the public library where I'd worked for nearly 40 years. The scholarship would buy books for children whose families couldn't afford them. Felt exactly like something Frank would have wanted. For the first time in months I slept peacefully. Daniel had no idea. Summer arrived. He finally visited. But instead of asking how I was feeling, he asked if I'd signed the paperwork transferring the deed. "There isn't any paperwork to sign," I replied. He looked confused. Melissa avoided eye contact. Then Daniel said something I'll never forget. "Mom, we're counting on that house." Counting on it. Not asking. Counting on it. I looked at my son and realized he wasn't seeing his mother anymore. He was seeing real estate. Weeks later, I received a phone call from one of my old neighbors. "Margaret, I thought you should know. Daniel's telling everyone he's remodeling because he'll own the place soon." I thanked her. Then I quietly called Susan again. "Everything is finalized," she assured me. Months passed. My health remained stable. Ironically, once Daniel realized he couldn't rush anything, he almost disappeared from my life. The nurses became my family. Other residents celebrated birthdays with me. Emma, now 16, secretly began visiting on her own after school. One afternoon she sat beside me and whispered, "Grandma, Dad says you're stubborn." I smiled sadly. "What do you think?" She squeezed my hand. "I think you're lonely." That broke my heart. But it also gave me hope. Emma wasn't becoming like her parents. I told her stories about her grandfather, about kindness, about earning things instead of expecting them. She listened to every word. Near Christmas, Susan invited me to attend the library board meeting. They wanted to name the future reading room after Frank. I accepted. Standing inside that familiar library brought tears to my eyes. Shelves I'd organized decades ago were still there. Teachers remembered me. Former students recognized me. One little girl hugged a stack of books and thanked the librarians for helping her discover reading. In that moment, I knew I'd made the right decision. Months later, Daniel learned the truth. Susan informed him after he once again demanded information about the estate. He drove straight to the nursing home. His face was red with anger. "You gave my inheritance away?" I remained calm. "No. I worked my whole life expecting that house." I looked directly into his eyes. "No, Daniel. Your father and I worked our whole lives for that house." The room fell silent. "You chose property over people." He opened his mouth to argue. I continued. "I begged for time with my family. You offered contractors instead." His shoulders dropped. For the first time in years, he had nothing to say. He left without another word. A week later, Emma visited again. She hugged me tighter than ever. "I'm sorry." I kissed the top of her head. "You have nothing to apologize for." Several months later, Daniel returned. This time alone. No anger. No demands. Just regret. "I'm ashamed," he admitted. "I thought I deserved it." I nodded. So did I. Until life taught me nobody deserves love without giving it first. He cried. So did I. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing not to let bitterness become your final chapter. Our relationship never returned to what it once was. Trust takes time. Sometimes years. But Daniel slowly began showing up without asking for anything. He visited because he wanted to. He pushed my wheelchair through the gardens. He brought Emma. He even volunteered at the library fundraiser honoring Frank. When the Frank and Margaret Ellis Children's Reading Fund officially opened, dozens of children walked through its doors. Their laughter echoed through the building. Watching them choose books reminded me why Frank and I had worked so hard all those years. Our legacy was never meant to be square footage. It was meant to change lives. If my story has taught me anything, it's this. The greatest inheritance you leave behind isn't a house, a bank account, or a piece of land. It's the example you set. Money can divide a family. Love, integrity, and generosity can rebuild one. And sometimes the most valuable thing you leave behind isn't waiting inside your home. It's waiting inside the hearts of the people you choose to help.